I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today. I'll have to say that this presentation today, this briefing, is mostly for the webcast audience and for the follow-on audience in the on-demand webcast, since John Kerry is a tough act to follow. He stole my audience today. So the organization that I come here with is the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative. And we are sponsored here by the Abibiman Foundation from Ghana and the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development from Jerusalem. Today, we'll be focusing on the science part of faith and science. Now, my name is Stuart Scott. I'm the founder of the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative. I'm also Deputy Director of ESCO, International Ecological Safety Collaborative Organization, with headquarters in Beijing and North American headquarters in New York City, a block from the United Nations. The title of my briefing today is Rethinking Economics in the Age of Runaway Climate Change. A few days ago, in the New York Times online edition, was a very interesting article. The second paragraph starts with the quote, "Even with a deal to stop the current rate of greenhouse gas emissions at COP20, scientists warn the world will become increasingly unpleasant." But the author went on to say, without a deal, they say, the world could eventually become uninhabitable for humans. That is a watershed to have the mainstream press admitting, acknowledging that we are on course for an uninhabitable world. Now, I got my start very early in environmental activities, in sustainability, before the word was coined. I was a stockbroker for Merrill Lynch. And in 1978, I turned out this brochure and found that there was a huge demand for an environmentalist orientation on investing. It was too early to do it at Merrill Lynch. I went on to other things in my life and have been going ever since. Now, I'm showing this slide because I wanted to highlight the fact that the negotiations that are going on a few yards from here are a negotiation not between the global north and the global south. They are a negotiation going on between those who would save humanity and life on Earth and those who would cash it in. Now, I'll call your attention to the North Polar region, the Arctic of our planet. And this is a representation of the extent of late summer Arctic sea ice, September 1980. Just a few years later, September of 2007. Now, lest you think that I chose 2 years that would highlight a false trend, this is the trend monitored by the University of Washington in the United States. The lowest line is late summer, September. And scientists recently had to revise their approximation of the decay in Arctic ice from a linear relationship to an exponential decay. And they predict that as soon as next summer, we may see an ice-free Arctic. Now, that has consequences. The Arctic keeps the rest of the planet cool. Let's go back to the Arctic zone, however, and take a look in particular at the East Siberian Arctic shelf. This is where the gun is currently going off. We are pulling the trigger in the East Siberian Arctic shelf. It's a spit of land that extends out into the ocean, several hundred kilometers in places, and it is as much as 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers long if you follow the reticulated coastline. It's about 70 meters deep in the water, about 200 feet or so, shallow. And currently, it is emitting methane gas. Now, it's estimated by the scientists who are studying this that there are from hundreds to thousands of gigatons of methane stored there, stored as methane hydrates. And in 2007, expeditions to this area found several hundred of these plumes of methane gas, 1 or 2 meters wide. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of the slide the notation that methane is 86 times as powerful a greenhouse gas. You will see that number represented differently, and I'll explain why. The first year the methane comes out of the water or the land, it's being emitted from the permafrost on land as well. It is over 150 times as powerful a heat-trapping gas as CO2 the first year. But it decays. Once it's out into the atmosphere, it combines with hydroxyl radicals and becomes CO2 and H2O. So it degrades to CO2 over time. Over a 20-year period, it's from 80 to 90 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as CO2. And over a 100-year period, it's only 20 to 30 times as powerful. What you were seeing there was students going out on an Arctic lake in Alaska. Same thing happens in Alaska as Siberia. And now it's become Arctic fireworks for students or kids to go out, puncture holes in the ice, look for thinning spots, punch a hole, light it, and hope that they don't get blown away. This is happening all over in Alaska, northern Canada, Siberia. Now, I'd like you to listen to a scientist's description of what's going on.
So for the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a joint Russian-Alaskan expedition going out into the Siberian Sea and observing this, and they've been seeing great plumes of methane bubbling up all over the East Siberian Sea. The whole zone of millions of square miles of territory is now releasing all of its methane cover.
This is Dr. Peter Wadhams, one of the world's foremost authorities on Arctic sea ice. For over 30 years, he's been going out on nuclear submarines owned by the British Navy under the Arctic ice cap, focusing the sonar upward to study the ice cap. He's got over 300 peer-reviewed papers that have been published. He is the authority. He does not have a speech impediment. His hesitation, millions of square miles, is because it's shocking what the scientists are seeing. Now, Dr. Natalia Shakova, Russian scientist, leads a team of scientists who are studying conditions on the Arctic shelf. I'd like to play for you some of what she has to say about what's going on there.
So the methane in the atmosphere, the total amount of methane in the atmosphere, in the current atmosphere, it's about 5 gigatons. The amount of carbon preserved in form of methane in this Siberian Arctic shelf is approximately from hundreds to thousands of gigatons. And of course, it's only 1% of that amount is required to double the atmospheric burden of methane. But to destabilize 1% of this carbon pool, I think it's not much effort needed, considering that the state of permafrost and the amount of methane currently involved.
Now, in that same interview, she went on to say the following.
Shortly speaking, we do not like what we see there. Absolutely do not like.
We do not like what we see there. Absolutely do not like. She's a mother. It's very shocking what's going on in the Arctic. Now, Dr. Shakova and her team estimate the volume of methane currently being released at approximately 50 gigatons. There's no real way of knowing for sure with accuracy. This is her best guess based upon her study of the conditions. Remember, there are from hundreds to thousands of gigatons there. So she's estimating a small fraction being released. She does not, we do not know how quickly that release is happening. That's 50 billion tons of methane gas. It's 10 times the amount of methane currently in the Earth's atmosphere. And that much methane would more than double the total burden of greenhouse gases, including all of the CO2 up there. That is, we would quickly go from 400 parts per million to 800 to 1,000 parts per million of CO2 equivalent, because methane is so powerful.
At the moment, we have to rely on Shakova and Semiletov, who've been doing that work, and they have then expert knowledge of the seabed conditions, and they're the ones who are estimating the 50 gigatons. So that could be revised up or down if further work is done in that area.
And do you think civilization could survive a 50 gigaton release of methane?
No, I don't think it can. I think that if you look at the existing predictions of global warming rates, what's kind of eerie is the fact that the business as usual projections, even the cautious ones produced by IPCC, are still giving us about 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and with 2 degrees has been taken arbitrarily as the level beyond which nasty things happen. I don't know why it's 2 degrees, but that will be reached by the middle of the century, and 4 degrees by the end of the century. Now, 4 degrees, people who've calculated what that would do to food production, to die-off of forests, to acceleration of warming due to various extra feedbacks that kick in, that the general conclusion is pretty dire, that if you get to 4 degrees of warming, then collapse of civilization is what's going to happen, because the world won't be able to sustain anywhere near its present population. So the result will be chaos and warfare. So that's just the eerie thing is that's predicted by the IPCC report, but the projection of warming by the end of the century is 4 degrees. But nowhere do they state at all that 4 degrees is a catastrophe for economically and socially for the planet. And now with this Arctic methane, you're simply adding another element to the warming, even if it's only an extra 0.6. That brings forward the date at which catastrophic warming is achieved by maybe 20 years.
So even the IPCC report, which is predicting 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, but not identifying that as the tantamount to the collapse of civilization. Other scientists are saying we're on target for 4 degrees of warming by the middle of this century, and the Arctic methane release brings forward whenever that warming will be achieved by perhaps a couple of decades. This is the gun going off. This is the emergency that's happening on the planet, and it's not being discussed in the negotiations. This is a travesty. Now, what I'm showing you are 2 polar projections of the planet. On the left is the methane levels detected in November of 2008. And on the right, the methane levels detected in November of 2012. This is the millions of square miles of Arctic territory that Dr. Wadhams said earlier is releasing all of its methane cover currently. And I'll call your attention to the lead scientist of this group, of a Russian, an American, and a Chinese scientist, Dr. Ira Leifer, because I have a quote from Dr. Ira Leifer that he gave to a journalist last year in December. Some scientists are indicating we should make plans to adapt to a 4 degrees centigrade hotter world. While prudent, one wonders what portion of the population could adapt to such a world. My view is that it's just a few thousand people seeking refuge in the Arctic or Antarctica. This is the prediction, the assessment of a scientist who's studying the problem currently. Again, it's not being discussed in the plenaries just a few yards from here. What I'm showing you on this slide two representations of the Earth without the landmass is obvious. You're seeing the methane veil that is slowly spreading over the Arctic, over the northern latitudes, over the tropics in the northern hemisphere. The colors, yellow represents 1,750 to 1,850 parts per billion of methane. The orange, 1850 to 1950 parts per billion. And above 1950 is the red. And you're seeing two different two-month periods close by one another. Basically, this veil is spreading over the Earth at about a meter per day, I'm told, heating everywhere it goes. Remember, earlier we said methane is over 150 times as powerful a heat-trapping gas as CO2 during its first year of emission. Now, the peak, as far as I know, was achieved on January 19th this year when it approached 2,400 parts per billion. And for a frame of reference, pre-industrial levels are estimated to have been about 720 parts per billion. So we have already, with our burning of fossil fuels, our burning of 200 million years of stored carbon, stored by sunlight in life forms, underground, under the ocean. We are liberating that in 150 to 200 years. We have already boosted the methane levels by 2.5 times, perhaps. And we're going much more quickly now. Now, I'll show you just 4 maps that will make you think about the consequences for humanity and life on Earth. The first is the record, according to the University Corporation for Atmospheric Science, Atmospheric Research. It's the preceding drought of the first decade of this century. The next 3 slides will show you the 1/3 point, the 2/3 point, and the final decade of this century for comparison. So just blur your eyes and keep them on the red, purple, pink areas. That's 2000 through 2009, 2030 through 2039, 2060 through 2069, 2090 through 99. What will happen to agriculture? The human body cannot survive long when it is over 105 degrees. You have to cool the body. When you get to 105, you are rushed to the hospital, or you're told to immerse the person in water, in ice water. The planet will be regularly over 105 degrees in the mid-latitudes. Agriculture in the United States, toast. In large areas of South America, toast. In large areas of Southern Africa, toast. Unless you like a lot of toast, this is tragedy. This is the catastrophe. Now, first, let's move on to the second topic of my briefing, the real cause of climate change, not CO2. The global operating system is seriously flawed. Now, no one ever taught you about a global operating system in school. Maybe a new concept, but it will be obvious to you in a short moment. And that operating system, that flawed system, is known conventionally by 2 names: money and economics. In particular, Neoclassical Economics, although when you read the word economics in the news, you don't see neoclassical. That dropped out of the record about 100 years ago when Neoclassical Economics was installed as the only game in town by the very clever action of a few Wall Street bankers who accomplished that by buying the chairmanships, endowing the chairmanships of a couple of major business schools in the United States. And pretty soon, everybody got on board, and Neoclassical Economics was the only game in town. All other models were forced out to the periphery. It's a broken system. Not only does it Neoclassical lack a concept of Earth, it denies that the limits of Earth are relevant. Now let's go on. I want to introduce you to a concept, perhaps. It's called a meme. The word was invented about 40 years ago. It's got 2 diverging meanings, but they're kind of similar. When you call something a meme to young people nowadays, it's something that went viral in Facebook or YouTube. But the original meaning of the word was a thought form, a thought or a set of thoughts that is like a virus. It acts in humanity like a virus. It conditions us. It passes itself from generation to generation, from nation to nation. It mutates over time. It is like a virus of our minds. It's an idea that takes on a life of its own. It becomes symbiotic with a host. In this case, the physical host organism is all of humanity. If humanity dies, money dies. But money does not have that realization. It does not have that consciousness. It spreads across nations and generations, like I said. Money is a meme. Make no mistake about that. It is not like a virus. It is a virus. It's an extremely problematic meme because it's capable of corrupting and destroying its host without our knowing it. That is what is going on. Money and economics are the root cause of climate change. And that's obvious. That's the secret hiding in the room. Money and economics promote to the highest level of authority in government, as well as the sphere of economics, those who are best at responding to the needs of money, making the most money, externalizing the considerations of ethics, of equity, of survival, of ecology. Money is the flawed system under which we operate. Money and economics, neoclassical economics. We are currently trading this for this. It's sad. It's so easy to make growth look sexy when you don't look at the externalities, the declining sea ice. Neoclassical economics, NCE speak, externalities are things we must ignore, like climate change. Here's Superstorm Sandy, Super Typhoon Haiyan, all of the other storms and dust storms and all of the hunger, all of the displaced people have to be ignored, plus the military cost of securing the flow of fossil fuels. It's easy to paint growth green. Easy to paint the GDP as something desirable. It is no longer desirable. We have gone beyond the point that we can afford to grow our economy anymore. We are overwhelming the natural systems of Earth. No matter what you call it, there is no such thing as sustainable growth. That is a contradiction in terms, an oxymoron. Green growth, no such thing. Currently, we are turning this, a rich, abundant nature, into this as quickly as possible. I say we because we are all engaged in that. There are no bad people per se. We are all trapped by the system we're in. We must change that system quickly. Now, there is a life-affirming economic operating system, and it's called ecological economics. Of course, how could you have an economic system that would be sustainable over long periods of time and not base it in the ecology of Earth? And this gentleman, Dr. Herman Daly, is said to be the founder, the father of ecological economics. He was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 by Dr. Rajendra Pachauri in particular. And he was actually the winner of the Blue Planet Prize, which comes out of Japan, much less prestigious, but he accepted that last month. Now, I want to discuss with you very briefly something called the carbon bubble. It's not extremely well known, but it's growing in its profile. And it's something that I am trying to help burst. And so I want to teach you about it, if you don't know. And we value it currently, or those who have analyzed it value it currently as $28 trillion worth of carbon. What you're seeing there is a representation of the 1,500 gigatons of CO2 that have been released from burned fossil fuels since the start of the Industrial Revolution, 1850 to 2000. What you're seeing there is the amount that was released from the burning of fossil fuels in the first decade of this century, 1/5 as much. We are accelerating the problem. And here is all of the known fossil fuel reserves owned by companies and countries. 2,800 gigatons worth of CO2 valued at $28 trillion. The science tells us that for a 4 in 5 chance of avoiding runaway climate change, the end of civilization, perhaps the end of life on Earth, that 80% of all known fossil fuel reserves must be abandoned, left in the ground, unburned as stranded assets. Do we have the wisdom and self-control to leave that much in chips on the table? We must. That is the remaining burnable carbon dioxide. That is the unburnable stranded assets. And this is without the methane trigger. Now, let me look at the carbon bubble in another manner. In order to stay below 2 degrees C, and scientists have said 2 degrees is too liberal a goal. James Hansen, who proposed the 2 degrees C, has said 1.5 degrees is the most that we can handle. And this year, for the first time, as far as I know, it appears in AR5, the figure 1.5, tentatively. 66% by the IPCC report to 80% by the IEA of all the fossil fuel reserves of all companies and nations are unburnable. If we are to save our planet and humanity from runaway climate change, we have to write off $28 trillion worth of stranded fossil fuel assets. And as investors wake up to the huge risk involved in owning fossil fuel stocks, the bubble in those overpriced stocks will begin to burst. It has begun to burst. I am doing my best on a daily basis to make sure, as are many, many other people, to make sure that it bursts quickly. And I predict it will burst within the next 5 years. I pray that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the $28 trillion of loss, and that's a demonstration on the south of Manhattan Island in the Wall Street district, the famous Brass Bull, with police protecting the Brass Bull from the protesters, and that's the carbon bubble that they are trying to help burst. Another way to make this carbon bubble burst is through what's called the Divestment Movement, which is lodged very squarely in universities around the world. Divest UH is University of Hawaii. I reside in Hawaii when I'm not giving these briefings. The University of Hawaii has divestuh.org, a website I created and will give to any university that doesn't have a divestment website. And what we say on the website is that all endowments, pension funds, mutual funds, estates, and trusts, all money managed by others on your behalf, will be invested in fossil fuel stocks, unless you've taken special precautions to invest in funds that don't. And few people are aware of the problem, are aware of the risk, because all fossil fuel stocks may crash in value, I predict, by 60 to 80%. And those divesting first will avoid the worst and help get that bubble bursting to save humanity. Again, I was the first environmentalist stockbroker on Wall Street in the 1970s. This will happen. We must quickly learn that this is far less valuable than this. If we are to have any hope of survival, I'm sorry to have such dire words for you, it means we have to put a price on carbon. We have to value the externalities that we are currently ignoring. As Al Gore said this morning, we cannot afford to continue to allow our atmosphere to be used as a sewer for CO2. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is my email address. You're welcome to contact me with any questions or comments. Or if you have an audience that you'd like me to make a presentation to, I try to do as many of these as I possibly can on a daily basis. Thank you very much. I have name cards if anyone would do a name card swap with me. And if there are any journalists in the room who will write this up, I'd especially like to know, have links to your articles and photos if you publish them. I think we're out of time. If anyone has any questions for me, I'll take them in the hallway because there's another press conference scheduled immediately after.